The floor is yours.
Right, Volkssturm angetreten! Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are FGR 5, German paratroopers, as you probably recognise from the uniforms. Now, Linden is sporting the Splinter pattern, second pattern jump smock with an MP40 submachine gun. This was a 9mm, generally used for sweeping and clearing. Not much range, but the rattle did put the fear of God into the enemy. As you know from Hollywood, everybody carried an MP40, you know what I mean? Which was basically not the case. It was only really squad leaders and NCOs that would carry one. He's carrying the, the paratrooper MP40 mags, because basically we had to carry more ammunition. Because we were dropped into enemy territory, we had to carry more ammunition. We had the supplies dropped into us. So basically, we had what we could carry, and anything else we found we could use. Now, moving on to Phil, he again is wearing the second pattern Splinter jump smock with the more common K98 Mauser rifle. Now, the K98 Mauser rifle, the actions are still in service today in modern sniper rifles because they've never been surpassed. Right then, Phil, what we'll do is we'll do a bit of a demonstration on how one of these would have sounded. Phil, fall out 2 spaces back, load and make safe. Now, you might want to stick one finger in your ears when this thing goes off. They'll be firing 5 rounds. You know when you're ready, Phil? Oh, excellent. Right, we'll be firing in this direction. So if anybody doesn't like loud bangs, now is the time to leave. Right then. Right then, Phil. On the command. 5 rounds, rapid fire. Fire! That is basically how a K98 sounds. Now, if you can sort of imagine hundreds of these things going off, plus machine guns, plus 9mm, the din of battle was probably, how could you put it, horrendous and incredibly frightening. And lastly, we have, wherever he's gone, he's done one. Just like a medic, you can never find him when you want him. Right, he is, he's a field medic, basically. He's carrying a 1936 Tornister pack. Now, this was a standard pack of the German Wehrmacht up until about 1940, 1941 when it fell out of service. However, as second line troops, you find a lot of Volkssturm units, Hitler Youth units, medics. They actually pressed them into service later on in the war. He's also carrying a medical field canteen, which actually clips off a lot quicker and a lot easier to administer aid to to casualties. He would be carrying 2 or 3 of these, so basically to carry water into the field. Obviously, he's wearing the Geneva Cross. The Cross of Geneva basically identified him as a non-combatant, and to shoot him would have been theoretically a war crime. Again, you can see him carrying his second canteen. And is that the second one?
First one.
First, oh, bloody hell. It's because he moved. I'm not used to him moving. And, so basically, he's carrying a bayonet, but the bayonet is more for, how can you put it, cutting bandages, things like that. Very rarely used for personal protection, unless, of course, we're fighting the dirty Russians that used to kill us medics. And lastly, he's carrying his medical pouches. In there, he'll be carrying morphine syringes, bandages, anything he could basically pile together to help casualties in the field. Right, that's us done then. That's FJR5. Right, moving on to the... Right then. Legs on! Pull out. Nobody knows what full earth is.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, well, as my colleagues join us, we're a very different type of German combat formation. We are the Volkssturm V3, though strictly speaking just the Volkssturm. In October 1944, obviously Germany was at the end of its resources, facing the Soviets coming from the east and the British, Americans and later the French coming from the west. And obviously Germany was basically running out of soldiers. So the Nazi Party decided in October 1944 to form the Volkssturm, or the People's Storm, to give it its translation. To you and me, the Home Guard. Now, I'm sure you are familiar, obviously as we all are, with the British image of the Home Guard. Now, in some ways, the German Home Guard, the Volkssturm, was similar. Again, many older men in their 40s and 50s, indeed many of us here, as you can see from our chests, are actually World War I veterans. So men all the way up to the age of 60, though we do know that many even older than 60 served, and also very young boys from the Hitler Youth. Now, they also, towards the end, had ladies joining them, and you'll notice we have a lady in our ranks, and they did also see combat. Now, towards the end of the war, between October 1944 and May 1945, it's estimated that approximately 600,000 to 700,000 people served in the Volkssturm. However, unlike the British Home Guard, who obviously, thankfully, saw no real combat, the German Volkssturm sadly saw an awful lot of combat. And of the estimated 600,000 to 700,000 men and a few women who served in their ranks, approximately 150,000 were fatalities. So they had a very, very, very different experience. Now, obviously, as they're formed at the end of the Second World War, Germany is running out of just about everything, not just people to pull triggers, but the weapons to give them and the uniforms to give them. So the Volkssturm tended to get, if you like, what was left in the bottom of the cupboard. And that accounts for why we have such a wide variety of, well, I say use the word uniform euphemistically, as I'll show in a minute. Some people just had to make do with an armband. They also had all sorts of bits of equipment from different branches of the service. And they also received a very wide variety of weapons. Anyone who's visited our display down under the arch there will have seen that we had French rifles, Soviet rifles, a few German rifles, British rifles, you name it, the Volkssturm got it. And they had to fight with what they received. Now, let me step back a little and give you what you might loosely describe as a fashion display. Firstly, we have this hero of the Volkssturm. Again, he would have served in World War I. He's not actually wearing... Oh, he is, there you go. Now, one way of spotting he's a World War I veteran is he's got his Iron Cross second class from the First World War and what was called the Hindenburg Medal, which was awarded in 1933 to all soldiers who had fought in the First World War. And on photographs of the Volkssturm from the period, you see a lot of the men, even when they're just dressed in civilian kit like this, will have their ribbons from the First World War. So in that sense, although they're in their 40s, 50s, a few in their 60s, they are in one sense combat trained, albeit for the wrong war. And they probably thought they'd done their bit in the First World War enough. Now, obviously he's wearing civilian clothing, typical German working man's outfit. You see a lot of photos with that sort of cloth peaked cap, and he could have been anything from a farm worker, a dock worker, a factory worker. And as the Soviets, or if it was in the West, the Americans or British were approaching, he'd probably get an order, a few hours maybe, if he was lucky a few days, to leave his workplace, and they'd issue him with a handsome armband. That was very important, because under the Geneva Convention, if you're a combatant, to be identified as combatant, you've got to wear some form of uniform. Well, the best he's going to get is this homemade Volkssturm armband. But that now distinguishes him on the battlefield as a combatant and to be treated under the Geneva Convention rather than shot out of hand as a bandit or partisan. Unfortunately, in the East, the Soviets had not signed the Geneva Convention and chose to ignore that particular requirement and just shot them out of hand. Now, he's lucky in two respects. First of all, he's been issued, got to swing it out, there you go. As you saw from the Fallschirmjäger description, this is a standard K98. It's an early war K98, you can tell that because it's got a flat butt instead of big thick bit of metal, and so he's probably not going to have an ammunition problem. As you turn around, Matt. And so in one sense he's a lucky member of the Volkssturm. He's going to get 5 to 10 rounds of ammunition which will actually fit his rifle. Fairly unique. He's also part of an anti-tank unit. Why? Because he's got these handsome Panzerfausts. That's one of the first models of the Panzerfaust. That's the later model of the Panzerfaust. And you see lots of photos of members of Volkssturm and also Hitler Youth peddling around in 1945, hunting Soviet or American or British armour, firing these anti-tank weapons, which were very effective. They could knock out any Allied tank in the Second World War. The one downside of it is you've got to get to within about 40 or 50 yards of your enemy. So a lot of guys knocked out Allied tanks and would then have been celebrated posthumously after the surrounding infantry shot him dead. So there you go. This would be what we call a first line member of the Volkssturm. He's actually received military clothing, standard appearance of the end of the Second World War for a German soldier. But some things distinguishing him. The Volkssturm was a Nazi party formation. Although they fought with the Wehrmacht and the army and came under army and sometimes SS command, they were part of the party. Thus, they did not often wear all the emblems that you see. So he's got no chest eagle, he's got no Lutzen on the collar, a very bare uniform. That's how they were meant to be. He's still got the armband, so there we go. He's got a later pattern armband. This is the more formal one that was issued. My colleague here has more of an early version of it. One of the jokes we have in the Volkssturm is we're the armband society. We have lots of armbands. He's also been issued standard German military equipment. So he's got the leatherwork, standard Second World War German infantry pouches. He's got a couple of grenades, one with a fragmentation collar here. He's also been lucky enough to being issued a steel helmet. And he'd probably, at the end of the war, be considered a fairly well-equipped German soldier, even though he's the Volkssturm. They'll be firing rounds like that. So he'd have 15 of those in each of his pouches here. And he's also lucky enough to have been issued a K98. So again, just as with the other chap, again, early pattern K98. So as I say, well-equipped member. But we mustn't forget, thank you very much, that we also had females in the Volkssturm. We were an equal opportunities employer. We made no distinction about age, no distinction about gender. So we were leading the way for the 21st century. Everyone had a chance to go out with us. Everyone got an equal opportunity to die. That was the downside of it. Now, my colleague here is dressed as the Germans say, a flak gunner. Sorry, what's that? Flak Helferin. Thank you, Flak Helferin. And Germany obviously is being bombed from the air relentlessly by the Allies, and being short of soldiers, many women were recruited into the flak units. You see a lot of photos of the flak batteries, again with young men and a lot of women manning those guns. So a lot of British and American bombers are actually being shot down by women. What can I say? You often get this image that women aren't part of combat. Well, certainly by Second World War they were, even in Germany. Now obviously as the Allied armies are sweeping into Germany, many of these women ended up being put into the Volkssturm. And so she's wearing her Luftwaffe blue overalls. I'll just show you. This shows you that she's a member of a flak gun outfit. She has been armed, she's got a pistol. The Germans didn't tend to issue the female members of the Volkssturm with anything other than pistols. I don't know whether that was because they thought that the women couldn't handle a proper gun, although some of them, we know in some German cities, would take up rifles and act as snipers. And the Americans do write about their soldiers being shot by female snipers belonging to the Volkssturm, happened in Heilsbrunn and elsewhere. So everyone got their chance. I myself would be a company commander, again somewhat older, First World War veteran, and that's why all this bling is there, all First World War. So as I say, so the Volkssturm would be called out. They tended to fight quite well in the east, mainly because the Soviets gave them no quarter. They tended to do the sensible thing in the west, and the moment the British and Americans approached them, say, would you like some prisoners? And because so many of them were dressed as civilians and older, certainly the British and even the Americans just tended to take their weapons off them and send them home. Sadly, not the same in the east. if the Soviets didn't shoot you, you would then go and spend 5 to 10 years in a Siberian holiday camp learning how to dig in mines. So there we go. So feel free to go and visit us down there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.